Hi, everyone. Hello, and welcome to our webinar on the Spain Digital Nomad Visa for Filipinos. We're so pleased that you could join us today. My name is Marian, and I will be your host for today. To give you an overview of our session, we will be starting with the eligibility criteria, followed by the requirements, costs, and timeline. And we conclude with the tax and social security considerations in Spain. Remember, we'll be having a question and answer portion at the end, so please hold on to your questions. For those who are new to this webinar, we are Lakbyte. Our name is a fusion of the words lakbay, the Filipino term for journey, and byte, symbolizing the digital world. We specialize in visa assistance services for Filipinos wanting to migrate to Spain via the Digital Nomad Visa. But first, we have a few housekeeping notes. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for playback. Next, please use the chat box for questions and comments. If you feel shy, we also have a Google form where you can send your questions. We'll be trying to address as many as we can at the end of the session. Now let's move on to the introduction of our speaker. Our speaker today is a lawyer hailing from Dumaguete. She topped the nursing board exams but felt a calling for law, leading her to the renowned Ateneo Law School, where she became a classmate and she was also the top of the class. After making her mark at one of the Philippines' top law firms, she joined a tech company in Singapore as Associate General Counsel. Over the past 2 years, she has lived for 1 to 3 months at a time in countries like Spain, France, Japan, and Singapore. She's moving to Spain in just 3 weeks, and she's here to share her insights and her firsthand experience about the Spain Digital Nomad Visa for Filipinos. Please join me in welcoming attorney Marian Vamslenbroek.
Thank you very much, Mara. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. Without further ado, let's dive right in. So I think before we even talk about the eligibility requirements and what you actually need to apply for the visa, I think it's best that we actually take a step back and look at what was available for Filipinos before this digital nomad visa was actually available. So if you wanted to migrate to Spain before, you would actually need access to, for one, lots of money, because you will need that for a non-lucrative visa or through the golden visa. You would also either need an employer to sponsor you to work in Spain, so that could be a work visa. However, this is actually quite difficult to get since most employers would prefer locals or EU citizens who already have a right to work in Spain. You also had, for example, the autonomo visa, but then you would have to have mostly Spanish clients, and you would even have to present a business plan. And the last, and I would definitely say not the least, is if you found an AFAM, if you found a Spanish national, and you got married to that Spanish national, you could actually move to Spain via that option. But what's common among all these options is that they're actually quite challenging for the typical or normal Filipino to achieve. So that's why I think that the Spain Digital Nomad Visa comes at such a perfect time, especially since we already have a lot of remote workers in the Philippines. So before we start, I'd just like to preface this by saying that we actually already have Filipinos who have been approved for this visa. Either they applied here in the Philippines at the consulate through BLS, or they flew over to Spain and applied from there. So I'm guessing all of you are excited to see or to know what actually is the criteria. So who can apply? Who is eligible to apply? Okay, so the key word that we have here is that it should be remote. You can be either a remote employee, so you can be an employee for a Philippine company, but you work remote, or you could also be a remote freelancer or contractor or self-employed professional. And I believe that a lot of, for example, people from Filipinos who work online will fall under this second category. So if you're a virtual assistant, if you're a software engineer, if you're a graphic designer that works online for either US, EU, or Australian clients, you will most likely fall under this criteria. Now, before anyone gets confused, I'll have to clarify that this visa requires that you should already be employed or you should already be a freelancer. You cannot use this visa to go to Spain to apply for jobs there. In fact, this visa actually prohibits you from working directly for Spanish companies, with a few exceptions that we will discuss later in this stream. So that's the first requirement. You have to be already working remote. The second is that you actually need work experience or a degree. Note this slide says or. So you should at least have 3 years of experience or show that you have a graduate degree. So it doesn't have to be 3 years of experience and a degree. It can be 3 years of experience or a degree. Next, so you work remote, you have 3 years experience or you have a degree. Next, what is the next basic requirement? It's that you should have been working with your client or with your employer for at least 3 months. And the connector here is and that the company you've been working for has been in existence for at least 1 year. So in the previous criteria, it was either 3 years experience or a degree, but in this criteria, you should have been working 3 months for your employer, and that employer should have been established for at least 1 year. So let's see an example so that it's clearer to understand for everybody. So let's take today's date. So today is August 26th, right? So if, for example, you were hired on May 1, 2023, earlier this year, and your employer was actually established last year, August 15, 2022, you can already apply for this visa today. However, for example, if you started work on July 15, just last month, and the company that you work for was just established October of last year, you will not meet the criteria of having worked for the employer for 3 months and the company having been established for 1 year. So I hope that this part here is clear. It's a double criteria that you should both meet. Next, we are gonna discuss how much you actually have to earn for you to be able to apply for this visa. Now, before we discuss how much, we first have to discuss where you can apply, because where you apply actually determines how much you will have to prepare for the visa application, or how much do you have to show that you earn monthly for the visa. So you have two options. You can apply in Spain or you can apply in the Philippines. So if you apply through Spain, you will apply through the UHE, and you have to fly to Spain through a Schengen tourist visa. So you have to apply for the Schengen tourist visa here in the Philippines, fly to Spain, and apply there. So the result, if you apply in Spain, is that you get a residence authorization, which will allow you to stay in Spain for 3 years. So when you get there, you can already stay in Spain for 3 years once you get that residence authorization. And then after 3 years, you can renew it for 2 years at a time. So it would be, for example, 3 years plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, etc. If you apply in the Philippines, it will probably be through the consulate, through BLS. What you will get is a visa. It's going to be in your passport, and it's valid for 1 year. So with this visa, you can actually fly to Spain, go there, and then live and reside in Spain, and it is valid for 1 year. So before the 1 year is up, so 2 months before that 1 year is up, you can already apply for the residence authorization mentioned earlier. So then you will apply for, and if you are granted, you will get 3 years. So it will be 1 year for the visa, 3 years because of the residence authorization, and then subsequent renewals will be similar to the residence authorization as well. So that will be 2 years at a time. So 1, 3, 2, 2, etc. Okay. So here, how much will you need to earn monthly to qualify for this visa? So if you apply so before we actually start with this slide, I would like to give two caveats, so to speak. The first is that there are going to be amounts discussed in this webinar that are originally set in euros. However, just to make calculations simple and to make it easier for everyone to understand how much money we are talking about here, I just reflected that in Philippine pesos and used the converter of 1 euro is 61 is equal to 61 pesos. Also, for the amount that you need to earn monthly, the amounts here are actually not fixed. These are actually based on 200% of Spain's minimum interprofessional salary or the Salario Minimo Interprofesional, basically what their minimum working wage is, and it's usually set every year. So for this year, if you apply for this visa, these are the amounts that you likely will have to be earning before you apply. Okay? So if you are the main applicant or if you're the sole applicant, you will have to prove that if you apply in Spain that you have 131,000 pesos of monthly income. If you apply in Spain, it's 153,000. If you have a second applicant with you and you apply in the Philippines, you will have to add another 49,000. And if you apply in Spain, you will have to add 57,000. And then all the other applicants after the first two applicants, you will just have to add 16,000 if applying in the Philippines and the 19,000 if applying to Spain. I hope that's clear so far. But to make it even clearer, I compiled a few frequently asked questions that I get usually when it comes to salary. So the first is it gross or net? So for this case, it's actually gross. It doesn't have to be the net income. Next, do you need to provide proof of property, car, house, lot? No. As long as you can prove that you meet the monthly minimum, then that should be fine. Do you need to provide show money? Also no. As long as you can meet the monthly minimum income that we shared in the previous slide, you can apply. Do you need to provide proof of savings? Also no. You also do not need to provide proof of savings. However, I would like to point something out here. So there have been a few instances at the UHE for those applying in Spain where sometimes they don't meet the monthly minimum requirement. So what others have tried to do is they've tried to supplement it with savings. So for example, they missed the minimum by 100 euros. What others have tried to do is they show savings of 100 euros times 36 because it's a 3-year authorization. So they show that they have savings of 3,600 to supplement their application. However, I would honestly not agree with this approach. I would probably not encourage this approach because the responses have been 50-50. So some have been approved by this manner. However, there also have been people who have been disapproved when they just show savings and they don't show that they actually meet the minimum required amount that they should earn monthly. Okay, the last question here for this slide is, what if I don't meet the required salary yet? So if you don't meet the required salary yet, I hope that you take it as some sort of inspiration as to what kind of salary you should have to be able to move to Spain. And please continue watching the webinar just so that when you do reach that salary, you already know that you're eligible, you already know what the requirements are, and you already know what the tax and the social security's considerations are. Okay? Next. This visa is also very interesting in the sense that you can already bring your family in immediately. Like you do not have to have a specific residence period before you bring them. So the question is, who can you bring? So the person there in yellow is the main applicant, and you can bring your spouse. So your husband or your wife, you can bring with you. You can also bring your minor children. Also, you can even bring your parents as long as they are in your care. Now, this last two people that you can bring are quite interesting, and I thought I would want to highlight it for everyone here. So for those of you who might have thought about migrating abroad or have been looking for options to migrate abroad, I think like a lot of you would know that if you migrate, it's usually difficult to bring children once they are already adults. But this visa actually allows you to bring adult children as long as they are dependent on you and they have not constituted a family of their own. So as long as you meet and prove those requirements, you can also bring adult children with you on this visa. Now, the last one is also quite interesting because even unmarried partners, you can also bring unmarried partners. So, what is an unmarried partner according to this visa? So, it's basically someone that you have a registered partnership with in some sort of register, similar to the pareja de hecho in Spain, or as long as it's similar to a marital relationship and there's proof of the relationship before both of you move to Spain. So, what does this mean? In the Philippines, we do not have a register for something like this, like a register for common law spouses. We don't have one like that. However, we do have things that we can use to prove that you are the unmarried partner of the main applicant. So for example, if you have a joint lease with your partner, you have a joint bank account, and we can even prepare for you a joint affidavit of cohabitation if both of you live together. Because if there's one thing that makes it appear that you are in a marital relation, it is actually living your lives together. Okay. We also have some frequently asked questions when it comes to this, who you can bring. So the first is there an age limit? And the answer is no. There's no age limit when it comes to who can apply as a main applicant, as well as who you can bring, as long as they meet the conditions. For example, the parents are under your care, the adult children are dependent on you and have not constituted their own family unit, and your unmarried partner is someone that you can prove an adequate relationship with. Okay, what about grandparents? So for grandparents, I actually emailed the OHED to clarify whether grandparents were included in the people that you could actually bring with you to Spain. And they confirmed that it's only up to the first degree of ascendants, which means that it's only up to the parents. So with this visa, you cannot bring your grandparents. If you want your grandparents to be included, you can ask your parents to be the main applicant and then apply with them as the parent of your parent. Okay. Now, this one is an interesting question. What about the children of your spouse or your partner? So, earlier, it was clear that if it was your child, whether it's a minor child or it's an adult child, you can already bring them along. But what about if you have a spouse and that spouse actually has a child that isn't your child? So, this one, you can actually bring that child. And even if that person of yours is not a spouse, but is a partner, you can also bring the child of that partner. Okay. Next is, what document can I show for unmarried partners? So similar to earlier that we discussed, you can have a joint lease, a joint bank account. You can also make a joint affidavit of cohabitation. So a lot of things you can use to prove that there is actually an existing relationship before you move to Spain. Next. So now that we know how much we have to provide, we also know how much we have, who we can bring along. I tried to simulate how much you would have to earn if you apply in the Philippines or Spain for like different combinations of different family units. So here we know that if you're a main applicant and then you apply from the Philippines, you will have to show at least 131,000 pesos. But if you apply from Spain, you'll have to show 153,000 pesos. What if you bring one dependent? So maybe it's a partner, maybe it's a child, maybe it's a parent. So you will have to show that you earn 181,000 in the Philippines and 211,000 in Spain. What if there's two dependents? You will have to show 197,000 in the Philippines and 230,000 in Spain. And then what about three dependents? It will be 214,000 for the Philippines and 249,000 in Spain. And lastly, what about four dependents? So it will be 230,000 for the Philippines and for Spain 269,000. So if you notice here, it's actually very heavily skewed that if you have more people, the jump in the monthly salary requirements isn't as huge compared for the first two. So if you have a big family, that is actually advantageous for you since you won't have to provide such a large amount per family member. Okay. Next. Also, we also have some frequently asked questions with regard to this topic. So, what if I can only afford to bring myself? So, what if we only have 130,000 or 150,000? Like, what are my options? There are actually many options available to you. However, one of the easiest options is that you go to Spain, migrate there for 2 years, apply for citizenship, and then once you have become a citizen, you can also apply for family reunification as families of EU citizens. That way, you can eventually bring your family over. But there are also other different permutations that we can discuss if you want to consult directly with me. The next is, can you merge the income of both spouses? And the answer here is likely no, probably not possible, because they usually peg it as to the monthly earnings of the main applicant. And if you do it for both spouses, then it would make the situation even more difficult in that if you do separate applications, you will have to show that you individually meet the amount. So it's usually just one applicant and then and then the dependents based on that application. Now, here I think is one of the best things about this visa. If you bring your family, if you bring your spouse, if you bring your partner, what can they do in Spain? They can work. They have the full authorization, they have the full right to actually work for Spanish companies. And this is something that isn't easily granted by other visas. So even if you are not yet a citizen, even if you're still there on residence, when you bring your family over, they can all already work in Spain. And I think this really would help a starting family or even an established family defray their cost of expenses, because it's not only one person working, but the rest of the family members who are able can also already work. Okay? So now that we know all that, so we know who are eligible, we know who you can bring, we know how much you have to earn every month, you have to answer the important question on, would your company or would your client be willing to write you a letter giving you explicit permission to work from Spain? So this is very important. This is a requirement required by both the UGE and the consulate through BLS. And you have to make sure that your employer or your client actually would allow you to work from Spain. Now, if you receive a yes from your employer or from your client, then that's good. And we can now proceed to the next step. So the requirements, what will you have to present so that you can apply for this visa? So if you are applying from the Philippines, you will most likely need an NBI clearance. So if you've stayed in another country within the last 2 years, you will also need a criminal background check from those countries. And note that this is only valid for 6 months. So you'll also have to time the timing of your applications from when you get this document. You'll also have to prove the existence of your company or the client that you've been working for at least 1 year. So if your client is a Philippine company, you will probably need a SEC certificate of incorporation. So if it's a foreign employer, for example, it's from the US, you will probably also need a certificate of incorporation or a certificate of good standing. So basically just similar documents depending on how or what the country issues. Also, you will probably need PSA documents if you're bringing a spouse, if you're bringing children. So you will have to prepare their birth and marriage certificates. This one is a unique requirement to when you are applying from the Philippines. You will also have to show that a medical certificate showing that you do not have like communicable diseases of a public nature. And this one has an even shorter validity. It is 3 months, and you actually have to go through a medical checkup and everything before you get this medical certificate. So note that this one is only required when you're applying from the Philippines. And the next is educational credentials. So basically a copy of your degree, because remember, one of the requirements is either 2 years of experience or a degree related to your role. Okay, next. Your CV, it has to be translated to Spanish. And then you also have to show documentation again that you are working with the company or the client for at least 3 months. There's also a criminal record declaration, which basically says that there has been an absence of criminal records for you for the past 5 years. And then, very important, financial documents, so bank statements, invoices if you have clients, pay slips if you have employers. So just to prove that you are actually earning the amount that you say that you are earning. And the last is if you apply from Spain, you must actually not be found irregularly in Spain. What does not be found irregularly mean? It means that, for example, you have a tourist visa, the tourist visa hasn't expired yet, you're still within the valid days, or if you're there with another visa, you're there validly and still within the validity period. So basically, that you are regularly there, that you have a rightful place there in Spain. Okay, next. Now, the next few slides, when we discuss, we're going to make a difference between those who are applying as employees and those that are applying as self-employed, just because the requirements differ and as well as the social security and tax considerations. So, if you are employed, what will you need? You will probably need a letter from your employer, which should also be translated to Spanish, showing your position, the length of time you've been employed, your salary, and the confirmation that they will authorize you to carry out your job from Spain. What else? You will also have to show an employment contract and also private medical insurance without co-payments and deficiencies. And if you are applying as an employee from Spain, you will probably have to show an SSS certificate of coverage. Now, what about for those who are self-employed? And this is where most of us or most of Filipino freelancers will fall under. So first, you need a letter from your clients, likewise translated to Spanish, showing the length of the relationship with you, the total amount of invoices they will receive from you, and again confirming that they authorize you to carry out your job from Spain. Obviously, you will also need to show your contract with them, and you will also need to sign a declaration to sign up as autonomo, which is basically their version of freelancers in Spain. The last documentation here is very important, and I know some freelancers might not have it, so it's best to already start securing this now if you plan on applying for this digital nomad visa. Now, this requirement is your certificate of registration with the BIR as a freelancer, and it should actually show that you've been registered for at least 3 months. So if, for example, after this webinar, you're like, oh, I want to apply already for the digital nomad visa, but you don't have this certificate of registration, you'll have to wait for at least 3 months after you obtain the certificate, since the UHE wants to see that you've actually been registered as a freelancer in the Philippines before they grant you the visa or the residence authorization. Okay, so what about the timeline? How long does it take for you to receive a decision or for your application to be granted or disallowed? So, ideally, if you apply in the Philippines, it should be 10 working days. And if you apply in Spain, it should be around 20 working days. Now, note here that it's working days, okay? So Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, those aren't counted. So effectively, if we say 20 working days, that's probably 1 month in real month time. Okay, so this is what it should take. But in reality, what does it take? How long does it actually take in reality? So the UHE, so when you apply in Spain through the UHE, they've actually been pretty good with the timeline. So usually we've seen a lot granted their residence authorizations after 15 to 20 working days from their application. Recently at the consulate, we've had someone apply. So in the consulate, it's supposed through BLS, it's supposed to take only 10 working days. However, we've had a recent application where the person applied on July 3 and the status online only changed on August 18. So around almost 30 working days when they applied in the Philippines. But it might also be worth noting that this is actually busy period for Spain since a lot are processing their visas other sorts of residence and work visas in Spain, and especially also student visas with school starting in September. So we are hoping that this was just uh, a glitch of some sort, or just a situation that because they are just processing so many visas and authorizations at this time, that's why it took that long. Okay, next, how we also have some FAQs when it comes to the timeline. How long before my departure can I apply for the visa if I'm applying from the Philippines? So normally for other tourist visas, you can actually apply 6 months before. We actually clarified this with the BLS. We called them and asked how many months before their departure could you apply, and they confirmed that usually it's around 2 to 3 months before departure that you can apply for the visa here through BLS. Okay. Next, this one. This one, I think we also get a lot of questions on this. So, what if I fly to Spain to apply, and my Schengen tourist visa is only valid for 15 days, but the decision will take already 20 days, and it's not just 20 days; it's actually 20 working days. So it's interesting. What's interesting here is as long as you've already submitted your application to the UHE, you can already stay in Spain legally. So even beyond the expiration of your Schengen tourist visa, while waiting for the resolution, you can just stay in Spain. So that shouldn't be an issue. Okay, next is I applied in Spain and I haven't heard back from the UHE in 20 working days. What should I do? So, this is also a very interesting point about this visa, in that if you apply in Spain through the UHE and you haven't heard back in 20 working days, there is actually what we call approval by administrative silence. So, essentially, since they haven't responded to you, you can then request for approval of your residence authorization due to administrative silence. So that's such a good thing about this visa because, for example, you don't hear back, you can just request for your visa to be approved, for your authorization to be approved based on administrative silence. And that's a very good thing about this visa. Now, what about if I apply to the consulate? There also an administrative silence policy similar to if I apply in Spain through the UPE? Okay, now that's actually a very interesting question because the provisions on applying through the consulate and the provisions for those applying through Spain through the UHE are two separate provisions. And it is only the provision on those who are applying in Spain through the UHE that makes explicit reference to approval by administrative silence. So I would say that probably no. If you are applying through the consulate, there probably isn't an administrative silence policy for approval. Okay. Next, we've been talking about applying through the Philippines or through Spain. Let me dive even deeper so that to help you at least decide if you've already decided to apply for the visa, where actually will you apply? So here are some considerations that I think you should take and consider. Now, not like there's really no one best way of applying. Like it's not better to apply in the Philippines or it's not better to apply in Spain. It really, really depends on your circumstances. So, for example, in the Philippines, you get a 1 year visa. And then if you're in Spain, you get a 3 year residence authorization. But the good thing is in the Philippines, you'll have to just show a lower monthly earning amount versus in Spain, where you have to show a higher earning amount. Remember earlier when we showed the slides of how much you had to actually present to Spain and how much monthly earning you had to present if applying in the Philippines. Also, for example, in the Philippines, if you must also have medical insurance, you must also have a medical clearance and go for tests, have it apostilled and DOH certified. Also, your passports will be kept throughout the application process. And the process can, as we've recently seen with someone processing at the consulate, it can sometimes be delayed. So if you have several trips planned within the period, it might not be the best for you. But for example, you're just here in the Philippines, you don't really have any urgent need to be in Spain or urgent need to go abroad, then applying through the Philippines might be the better option for you. Now, what about if you apply in Spain? What are the other considerations that you should actually also take into account? So first is that you will actually need to also apply for a Schengen visa application. And then the initial costs are higher. So you have to fly to Spain, have accommodation, your flights, etc. And if you are employed, you will need to get an SSS certificate of coverage, basically saying that you're still covered by Philippine SSS and protected when you're in Spain. Okay, so those are some of the considerations that are worth looking into if you're deciding where should I actually apply, in Philippines or in Spain. Okay, now here, what are the expected costs? So there are a few expected items that are typical of a straightforward application. So first is the application fee. So if you apply through the Philippines and there's a lot of miscellaneous fees, the BLS fee, the application fee, it's going to cost you around 7,000 pesos. So that's already the first fee that you'll have to think of. And the fees that really hit a lot of people hard are the fees for sworn translations and simple translations. So remember the documents that we mentioned earlier. You had the NBI, the SEC, and Certificate of Incorporation. You also had the PSA birth or marriage certificates. It's required that if you are presenting official documents from a separate country, they should be apostilled and sworn translated. What does sworn translated mean? Means that you should actually be translated by a translator that is accredited by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Spain. So it can't just be any translator, English, Spanish translator. It has to be an accredited translator. And the thing is, most accredited translations cost at least 30 to 40 euros per page. So it's simple if you only have like 1 to 5 documents. But what if, for example, your contract is 15 to 20 pages, your contract with your client or contract with your employer, and you have to translate all of those, that those costs can really add up. So I separately included this because I think they're a very significant cost that people should actually think about. Next is apostille. So it's not enough that you have the official documents translated. You also must make sure they are apostilled. So what is an apostille? For those who are not familiar, this is similar to the DFA red ribbon before that you'll have to provide just so that those documents can be recognized and used in Spain and by the UHE to process your application. And the next thing that you should also consider is our visa assistance services. For example, if you engage us at Lakbyte to help you process your visa, the fees that you pay us will also obviously come into with your costs. And lastly, accommodation. Now, the reason I separately listed accommodation here is that for most Filipinos, there are certain regions in Spain that we commonly want to move to. So usually Madrid, Valencia, Malaga. And a lot of these regions right now, it's really difficult to find a place to rent or a place to stay. So what essentially happens is if you move to Spain, sometimes you spend like a month or two at an Airbnb just so that you can look for a rental place. So that I think that cost should also be included in trying to forecast how much you will have to prepare just for the initial move itself. Okay? Okay, so other things to note. If you are an EU citizen or if you are a family member of an EU citizen, you're actually not eligible to apply for this visa. And also, if, for example, you are being transferred to a Spanish entity that is part of your group of entities, it might not also be issued. The Nomad visa might not also be issued because it might be more appropriate to do it through an intra-corporate transfer visa. Okay, we're almost finished. But first, let me talk about the tax and social security considerations. So first, let's talk about those who are self-employed or those who are freelancers. So this one, it's pretty straightforward. You'll have to sign up to Spain's social security system. And in the first year, you'll have to pay around 4,880 pesos. So, however, if, for example, you decide to reside in some areas, for example, like Andalusia, Madrid, and Murcia, you actually just pay zero for the first year since it's actually fully subsidized by by the government in those areas. However, from year two onwards, it will depend on your income, the amount you pay for social security, so that you can access health care and other services, is actually based on your income, and based on the minimum amount required for the visa. It will be about 20,740 per month. Okay, that's for self-employed individuals. If you're employed as a remote worker, you have two options. So the first option is you get an SSS certificate of coverage, and which will basically say that you're still covered by the Philippine SSS even if you're in Spain. Or option two, which is actually not a very convenient option, if I may say, is that the company will actually register itself with the social security system in Spain, and as well as register you as their employee once they have obtained the DLD. And I think that for most companies, they would be very hesitant to open themselves up for this. And I think that the best option if you're employed right now is either the SSS certificate of coverage, or another instance is there have also been people who've tried to pledge to sign up for autonomo. However, I think that at this instance, employees doing that is not very clear whether it's actually allowed to be done. But I can say that a few have done it. Okay. Next, let's go for self-employed taxes this time. So this one is also pretty clear. It's a graduated scheme from 19 to 47%. And before that 47% scares you, it's actually not a flat rate on your total income. So there's a certain amount of base that gets taxed at certain levels. And if it exceeds that bracket, it's only that amount that actually exceeds the bracket that gets taxed at a higher rate. So we'll see this later. We'll have some simulations as well, just so that you can see it clearly. Next is PH tax. Generally, and I will say generally because there are always exceptions to the general rule, if you are self-employed and you work in Spain, you will not be liable for taxes on the income that you earn when working in Spain if you are self-employed. And the reason is that in the Philippines, non-resident Filipinos, or those Filipinos who do not reside in the Philippines, are only taxed on Philippine-sourced income. So only if your source comes from the Philippines, that's when it's taxed. And usually for services, the source is the location of where the person providing the services is. So in this case, since you're located in Spain, it will not be considered Philippine sourced, but foreign sourced. And since you will become a non-resident citizen, you won't be liable for tax on that income. So I know some people sometimes get confused about this. So how I try to visualize it, especially for those who are self-employed, is just imagine like you have a Spain mall and a Philippines mall, like a Mall of Spain and Mall of Philippines. And then you actually work in the Mall of Spain, you earn wages there, and then you pay a little overhead to the mall because you work there and you earn there. So that overhead is the taxes. So in that case, you just pay to the Mall of Spain because you're just working there. In the Mall of the Philippines has nothing to do with you, so you don't have to pay taxes there. I hope that makes it a little bit clearer, just so that it's clear that way. And this is for self-employed. If you want to at least try to visualize the taxes that you will have, you can actually go to this website. It's called autonomoinfo.com. And you can try to like run it through like what the tax rates or tax brackets you would hit. Okay. What about for those who are employed? So for those who are employed, they're also subject to a graduated tax rate. And they also have the option to apply for a fixed tax rate of 24% under the Beckham law, which we will discuss in the next slide. However, if, for example, you are a Philippine employee, there is a possibility that you will be subject to tax in both the Philippines and Spain, especially because when Philippine employers pay you, for example, you receive your salary from payroll, that amount has already, the tax has already been withheld from that amount. So your employer withholds the tax for you and then pays that to the BIR for you. So what you can do here is that we actually have a bilateral tax agreement with Spain where the amount that you pay one country can be used to offset the amount of tax in the other country. And almost always, when comparing apples to apples, Spain has higher tax rates than the Philippines. So what will likely happen is that you will use the amount you paid in the Philippines to offset the tax that you pay in Spain. So for example, you paid 10,000 in tax in the Philippines and you owe 20,000 in tax in Spain. Effectively, you will only pay the higher amount. So you will pay 20,000. However, you have to show to Spain that you already paid the 10,000 in the Philippines so that you only need to pay the 10,000 in Spain. So I hope that's clear at this point. Okay. We also have some frequently asked questions when it comes to the tax rate. So people say I've seen references to a 15% tax rate online. Is that applicable to me? Is that applicable to us? And the answer is no. Those are only rates applicable for companies and not for individuals. So what about the Beckham law at 24%? So this is what I was mentioning earlier. So if you are an employee, you will actually be eligible if you meet the conditions that, for example, you haven't been a resident in Spain for the past 5 years, and you must become a resident in Spain. So you have to spend greater than 183 days in Spain for this year. So employees can be eligible. However, the laws or the regulations implementing this are still quite unclear and they haven't been read out. So right now, it's still not available for digital nomads, whether or not you're an employee or you are self-employed. So if you are self-employed, it's also highly unlikely that you will qualify for the 24% tax rate, since there are certain conditions that you have to meet. For example, you have to render innovative entrepreneurial services or you render services to certain tech companies. However, if, for example, you don't actually need to worry so much that whether or not you can avail of the 24%. And the reason is that unless you earn more than 203,000 pesos a month, it's actually cheaper for you to just pay the graduated tax rate. So it will only really be a concern if you earn more than 203,000 pesos a month. Now, this one is also another concern that we have had or we've seen those with trying to apply recently. So will the SSS issue certificates of coverage? So we've actually received conflicting reports regarding this. And so we've actually reached out through the bilateral agreement department of the SSS, which is responsible for administering this in the Philippines. And if you want to keep updated as to what the results are or what the resolution is, feel free to join the discussion in our Facebook group, Spain Digital Nomad Visa PH, if you haven't joined it yet. And then, okay. So here I said earlier that we would have some sort of simulation. So this is a simulation of the tax and the SSS that you will have to pay based on a certain amount of monthly salary. So this is already both tax and SSS, huh? This is not just tax, this is an SSS. This is already both. Moreover, this simulation does not include any deductions that you can actually already deduct, just because this is just a general overview. So the first, we're only concerned with the second and the sixth columns. But basically, the first column shows your income in euros. The second column shows your income in pesos. And the third column shows your net take-home income after plugging it into the online calculator. The fourth column shows the actual SSS and tax paid in euros. The fifth column shows how much of your salary or how much of your income, what the percentage of your income is being paid for SSS and tax. So you will see here that if, for example, you meet the minimum for applying in Spain, so around 153,000 pesos, you will probably be liable for around 42,000 in SSS and tax. If, however, for example, you have 244,000 monthly earnings, you will probably be liable for around 73,000 in SSS and tax. And if you have around 305,000 pesos, you will probably be liable for around 96,000 in SSS. Okay. Now, we already know the eligibility, we know the requirements, we know what our tax and social security considerations will be. How then should you apply? So there's actually three ways that you can apply. So the first is you can do it yourself. If you apply in the Philippines, it's like any other normal visa application as long as you can collect the documents. And because you've learned a lot from the webinar today, you know what those documents and requirements are, you can actually apply by yourself through VLS. The next is mixed, and this is our standard package at Lakbyte. So what happens is we tell you what the documents are, what you should actually prepare. We tell you tips and tricks. We tell you which service providers are good for translations, apostilles, insurance. But then it will just be you that you will go to these government agencies and retrieve your own documents. So it's basically a collaboration between us and between you as the applicant. However, for example, you don't have time or you're out of the country or you just really want it to be stress-free, there's also a premium service. And this is our premium package at Lakbyte, where we do everything for you. You just sign an SPA in our favor and then we collect all the documents, we have them all apostilled, and basically check in with you every 2 weeks to keep you updated about the status of your application. So it's very hands-free. So it really depends on what you need or what's applicable to you as a person. Okay, we're almost finished. Bear with me a little. So you've applied and then you've received the visa or the residence authorization. What do you do after receiving the visa? So there's also still a lot of things that you have to consider, but let's just go through the general for this webinar. Maybe those other things will be for another webinar next time. So you have to stay for at least 183 days a year in Spain. So they want you to become a resident, a tax resident in Spain for you to even qualify for renewal. Next, you can travel within the EU. You can actually travel to other countries like Belgium, France, Germany, whatever other EU countries, as long as you respect the 90/180 rule, which basically means that within any period of 6 months, you should have been in other European countries for just a maximum of 3 months. So is it 3 months at one time, like one gulp? No, as long as within the 6 months period, like if you total all the days that you've spent in a country other than Spain, it doesn't go over 90 days. Okay? Okay, what else? Can you work for companies in Spain? So you have the visa, you're in Spain. Can you work for companies in Spain? So it depends. Again, it depends on the category, what category you are applying as. So if you're an employee, it's a categorical ban. You really cannot work for any Spanish companies. If you're a freelancer, you can actually earn up to 20% from Spanish companies. And here again, that we mentioned earlier, the family members accompanying you have the right to live and work for Spanish companies fully. So that's 100%. And this is our last slide for today. And I think everyone already knows the answer. Does the digital nomad visa count towards citizenship? And the overwhelming answer is yes. So after 2 years of residency, you can already apply for citizenship. And when does the 2 years start? Does it start when you get your visa? Does it start when you get your residence authorization? No, it doesn't start from there. You still have to apply and get a residence card. It's the TIE, and it starts from the validity of that. Okay. So we said earlier that Spain wants you to be a resident, so you should spend at least 183 days in Spain. However, if you are gunning for citizenship, which I believe most of us here will be doing, you must not exceed 90 days outside of Spain just to prove that you really have an intention to reside there and be affiliated with Spain. And the last and very wonderful thing about this visa is that you are not required to give up citizenship. So, actually, several Iberico American countries, Andorra, Equatorial Guinea, Portugal, and the Philippines, we're actually lucky that we only need 2 years of residence and then we can apply for citizenship. Plus, we can even be dual citizens. We don't have to give up our initial country of citizenship. Having said that, I would like to thank everyone for sticking with me today. I've seen that everyone's basically stuck with us this entire time, and I'd like to thank you for your time today. If you have any more questions or things that you feel are unclear, you can contact us at info@Lakbyte. Or if you want to join our Facebook group, just join the Spain Digital Nomad Visa PH Facebook. At this point, we will now be discussing the questions that we might have received in the Google Forms.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Marian Van Slimbrook. That was a very comprehensive presentation with practical and real life examples, including the earning requirements, simulation of bringing dependents, unmarried partners, processing times, and even the administrative silence policy in Spain. Who knew? Now let's open the floor for some questions. We'll go through some of the questions that are already in the chat, and there are so very many, and those sent through the Google form. So one of the usual questions I got was, will you be providing a replay of our presentation?
Okay, so this this video is actually recorded. So as long as you have the original link and you just come back to this stream, you will be able to access the application.
Okay, great. So
Yes. So the answer is yes.
so you have access as long as you have access to the original link. Thank you. Now, let's go into the gist of it. Which place do you think, in general, is better to submit your application? Also, if you submit in Spain, do you need to stay there or can you go home in the Philippines as you wait for the result?
Okay, so again, like as I mentioned earlier, it's not a better place, it's just better for you. So if, for example, you have a big family and you don't want to spend so much on flights going to Spain and waiting for the results in the meantime, sometimes it might make more sense to just apply from the Philippines. But even if, for example, you have a big family, but you all are very confident that you will be approved, then you can fly to Spain and then apply from there and get the residence authorization. For the second question, if you submit in Spain, do you need to stay or can you go home to the Philippines as you wait for the results? So this one is a yes, but a qualified yes. So if you have a multiple entry Schengen visa, you can do this because you can go to Spain, fly to Spain, apply, go out of Spain, and then come back if your Schengen visa still has valid dates and it is a multiple entry. But if it's a single entry, then you'll have to come back, apply for another Schengen visa. So I would say that that would be quite challenging if you do it that way. So yes, you can come back, but I would prefer or I would suggest that you do this if you have a multiple entry visa. If you have a single entry visa and you want to submit in Spain, just fly there and then wait for the result.
Thank you. We have a very participative audience, and I noted that we're almost out of time, but we'll try to cover as many questions. We have a few more. Next, will I be qualified if I reach the minimum monthly income, but I have more than one company?
Okay, so we have seen actually people who've been able to successfully apply where they just combined both incomes from two companies. So it shouldn't be an issue. It's just a matter of presenting it that this is how much you earn in 1 month and you reach the minimum income. It doesn't have to come from just one company.
Okay, great. Next, for the monthly minimum requirement, what relation is necessary for the second applicant towards the main applicant?
Okay, this second applicant can be any of the individuals that we mentioned earlier. So it can be a husband or the wife, it can be it can be the parent, it can be the partner, it can be the child, it can be the adult child. So it could be any of those people.
Okay, and follow-up question to that is, could a boyfriend or girlfriend or significant other of the main applicant be eligible?
Yes, okay. So that is what we pointed out earlier that you could even apply as an unmarried partner. So as long as you prove that your relationship is similar to a marital one, that for example, you've lived together, you have joint bank accounts, joint leases, and so many other things that you can prove, you can actually apply even if you're an unmarried partner.
Okay, so let's do maybe two more questions. Very, very active audience. So for unmarried partners, in relation to that, can this also apply to LGBTQ? And if you have a partner for more than 10 years, owning properties, living in the same place, have the same bank account, but LGBTQ.
Okay, so Spain's actually quite open, and the provision on unmarried partner doesn't actually distinguish. So yes, it should be possible.
Well, that's great news to all our interested friends and colleagues. Finally, one last with DNP, is it possible to go work for any company in EU remote?
Okay, so this one is I will again qualify the answer. So first, our most basic requirement is that you will actually already have to have a job before you apply for the DNP. So no, you cannot use this visa to go to Spain and then apply to work remotely for an EU company. But if you already have an employer who is in EU and allows you to work remotely, that is perfectly fine as long as they are not a Spanish-based employer.
And there you have it. So to wrap it up, thank you. Thank you, Attorney Marian. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We really do appreciate your time and participation, as can be seen from all your responses. If you found this webinar valuable, please do consider joining our Facebook group. That's Spain Digital Nomad Visa PH. Again, Spain Digital Nomad Visa PH. Or check out our services at lakbyte.com. And if you have further questions, because we did leave a lot in our Google Doc, if you have further questions or wish to connect or wish to get to know Attorney Marian, feel free to contact us at info@lakbyte.com. We hope to see you in our next session. Once again, this has been Attorney Mara Ruiz, your host for today's webinar, and we have Attorney Marian. If you'd like a few more words.
Okay, thank you, Mara, and thank you, everyone. I know we ran out of time a little bit, and I know there are a lot of outstanding questions. So we'll try to address some of this in the Facebook group. Also, feel free to post your questions there so we can look at them and try to provide some answers. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for your time, and feel free to reach out if you have any further questions.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Bye.